Welcome back to The Hidden Thread. This is our second episode, and today we continue the story we began with Julius Caesar. If you haven't seen the first episode yet, we highly recommend starting there, because the man you're about to meet stepped into the world Caesar left behind. His name was Mark Antony. To some, he was Caesar's fiercest general. To others, a reckless lover who brought Rome to the edge of ruin. He walked beside greatness, tried to claim it for himself, and watched it all slip through his fingers. This is not just the story of a man. It's the story of a republic in freefall, of a power struggle that would decide the future of Rome, of loyalty, ambition, and a queen who changed everything. This is Mark Antony, Rome's last flame. He was born into a name that once commanded respect, but by the time Mark Antony came into the world, that name had lost much of its shine. Around 83 BCE, in the heart of a republic teetering on the edge of chaos, Marcus Antonius was born into a crumbling aristocratic family. His father, Marcus Antonius Creticus, had tried to make something of himself, sailing east with the title of praetor and a mission to fight piracy. But he died in disgrace, mocked by Romans who gave him the nickname Creticus, not as an honor, but as a joke. Antony was barely old enough to remember him. What he did remember was the struggle. He was raised mostly by his mother, Julia Antonia, a strong-willed woman and a blood relative of Julius Caesar. It was through her that Antony carried a faint connection to Rome's rising star. But back then, no one could have predicted what that thread would become. As a teenager, Antony was magnetic. Tall, athletic, and strikingly handsome, he had the easy charm of someone born to command. But he was reckless, too. Wild. He ran with a dangerous crowd, including a young politician named Publius Clodius Pulcher, infamous for his populist violence and street brawls. Antony wasn't interested in philosophy. He didn't quote Plato or write about virtue. He liked horses, drinking, women, and war. He racked up debts across the city, slept with married women, got into fights, but somehow, he kept getting away with it. Maybe it was charm, maybe it was luck, or maybe, underneath all that chaos, there was something more. At 22, Antony left Rome for the East, looking for something solid. He found it under the command of Aulus Gabinius, the Roman governor of Syria. It was here, far from the marble columns of the Senate, that Antony began to prove himself. When Gabinius was ordered to restore Ptolemy XII to the Egyptian throne, Antony led the cavalry on campaign through the harsh deserts of Judea and into Egypt itself. The mission was dangerous, messy, and deeply political. But Antony thrived. He charged into battle with fury, personally leading his men into danger. He wasn't just brave, he was bold and charismatic, the kind of leader soldiers would follow into chaos, even when the odds turned grim. In Judea, Antony helped enforce Roman authority during Gabinius's intervention there, supporting Hyrcanus II as high priest and crushing opposition. It was a brutal kind of politics, exactly the kind Antony understood. Plutarch later wrote that Antony's troops were wild and undisciplined, and yet they adored him. He ruled with instinct, not harshness. His men called him generous, fearless, and fair. He was already becoming the kind of Roman commander that the old republic didn't quite know what to do with. And Egypt, it stayed with him. The colors, the power, the beauty of Alexandria. He saw it once. and it never left him. Years later, when he returned, it wouldn't be as a soldier. It would be as something else entirely. By the time he came back to Rome, Antony wasn't just a rich boy with debts and stories. He was a fighter, a commander, a man who had tasted power and liked it. And Rome? Rome was boiling. Civil war was coming. The Senate was splitting. And one man, Julius Caesar, was preparing to make his move. When Antony stepped into Caesar's orbit, it wasn't just politics. It was gravity, and he would never escape it. When Julius Caesar marched across the Rubicon and declared war on the Roman Senate, Mark Antony was right behind him. The bond between them wasn't just military, it was personal. Caesar trusted Antony more than almost anyone. And Antony? He didn't hesitate. He followed his general into the storm. As Caesar marched to confront Pompey, Antony stayed behind to govern Rome. It was a test, a big one. But he wasn't a politician. He clashed with the Senate, mismanaged food supplies, and let tensions boil over. The people still liked him, but the Senate, not so much. Caesar had to come back and clean up the mess. But here's the thing. He didn't punish Antony. He brought him back into the fold. Because Caesar, for all his ambition, didn't trust many people. But he trusted Antony, and Antony delivered. At the Battle of Pharsalus, Pompey's power broke, and it was Antony who led Caesar's left flank. When the dust cleared, Pompey was fleeing to Egypt. He was assassinated upon arrival. Caesar was now master of Rome, and Antony was right there, at his side. For the next few years, Antony was everywhere Caesar was, as a consul, a general, and a symbol of this new Rome Caesar was building. But not everyone was thrilled. As Caesar's power kept growing, dictator for 10 years, then dictator for life, the Senate started to panic. A golden throne appeared in the Senate. Honors piled up. Whispers of kingship got louder. And standing right behind him was Antony. To the old guard, it looked like the end of the Republic. In that silence, a conspiracy began to take shape. Marcus Junius Brutus, quiet, philosophical, and fiercely loyal to the Republic, watched with growing concern. He and Antony were nothing alike. Brutus believed in principles. Antony believed in people. And for better or worse, he believed in Caesar. They were two very different Romans, headed for the same breaking point. Because Caesar wasn't slowing down. He was planning a new campaign in the East, and maybe even more titles back home. And all around him, the knives were already being drawn. March 15th, 44 BCE. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Julius Caesar was on his way to a Senate meeting at the theater of Pompey. He had plans to leave soon. Another military campaign in the East, maybe even against Parthia. Some said it would be his last. Others whispered that when he returned, he'd come back as king. Mark Antony was meant to be with him that day. But just before Caesar left, Gaius Trebonius, one of the conspirators, pulled Antony aside. A friendly chat, just long enough to keep him out of the way. Inside the chamber, it happened quickly. Casca struck first. Then came Cassius, Decimus, Brutus, more than 60 senators in all. 23 stab wounds. No guards, no warning. Caesar collapsed beneath the statue of Pompey, the very man he had defeated to take power. By the time Antony arrived, it was already over. He hadn't just lost a friend. He'd lost the man who held Rome together. For a moment, Antony feared he'd be next. He changed into plain clothes, disappeared from public view, and waited. The city was frozen. Would there be riots? More killings? No one knew what came next. The assassins called themselves liberators. They said they had saved the Republic. But they had no plan for what came after. And in that confusion, Antony saw his opening. He re-emerged 3 days later, not with a sword, but with a speech. At Caesar's funeral, Antony stood before the Roman crowd and gave them grief, then fire. He held up Caesar's blood-stained toga, read his will aloud, telling the people that Caesar had left them money, gifts, land. He reminded them of what they'd lost and who had taken it from them. The crowd turned violent. They set fires, stormed buildings. The homes of Brutus and Cassius were attacked. Rome exploded, not in celebration of freedom, but in rage. That moment changed everything. Antony had positioned himself as more than a survivor. He was Caesar's voice, his avenger. But then something unexpected. When Caesar's will was read in full, it named an heir. Not Antony, a teenager, just 18 years old. His name was Gaius Octavius, and he wasn't coming to mourn. He was coming to claim what was his. Mark Antony thought he'd be the one to inherit Caesar's legacy. He'd fought by his side, bled for him, avenged his death. He was consul of Rome. He had the army, the presence, the loyalty. But Caesar hadn't left Rome to Antony. He left it to an 18-year-old. Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew. No experience, no command. But with one line in Caesar's will, everything changed. Octavian, as he now called himself, became heir to the most powerful name in Rome. At first, Antony laughed him off. But Octavian was patient and strategic. He rallied Caesar's veterans, promised them land, justice, revenge. While Antony tightened his grip on Caesar's money, Octavian built an army of his own. The Senate noticed. When Antony tried to take control of a northern province by force, the Senate branded him a threat. And in a twist no one expected, they gave Octavian their blessing. In 43 BCE, the two sides clashed at the Battle of Mutina. Antony was defeated, but not broken. He fled west, regrouped, and watched as the Senate made a fatal mistake. They tried to control Octavian, and Octavian turned on them. He marched on Rome, demanded the consulship, and got it. Then he sent word to Antony. And just like that, the enemies became allies. Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, a powerful general still loyal to Caesar, formed the Second Triumvirate, a three-man dictatorship with full legal power to crush Caesar's killers. And they didn't waste time. They published lists of enemies, hundreds of names, senators, equestrians, rivals, even friends. The most famous was Cicero, whose head and hands were nailed to the forum. It was vengeance, bloody and calculated. Then came the real test. Brutus and Cassius, the lead conspirators, had taken control of the eastern provinces. Now they were raising legions of their own. The final confrontation was inevitable. The clash happened in 42 BCE in Philippi, northern Greece. Two of the largest Roman armies ever assembled faced each other. Caesar's heirs versus his assassins. The fighting lasted weeks. In the end, both Brutus and Cassius died by suicide. The Republic, as they had known it, was over. Octavian returned to Rome. Antony took the east. and waiting for him there was a queen he would never forget. After the Battle of Philippi, the world belonged to two men. Octavian ruled the West, Mark Antony ruled the East, and waiting in the East was Cleopatra. She was no stranger to Roman power. She'd ruled Egypt through war, exile, and scandal. She'd been Caesar's lover. Now she saw something similar in Antony, another Roman titan who could shape the world. When Antony summoned her to meet in 41 BCE, he expected a political answer. She gave him a performance. She arrived on a barge, purple sails, silver oars, musicians playing, perfume in the air. It was myth come to life. Antony, always drawn to spectacle, was captivated. He followed her back to Alexandria and stayed. What began as politics became something far more personal. They drank, hunted, played games, dressed as gods, and lived like rulers of a new empire. Cleopatra was brilliant, theatrical, and utterly fearless, and Antony was in love. But Rome didn't pause for romance. Back in Italy, trouble was brewing. Fulvia, Antony's wife, had raised troops to fight Octavian, trying to protect her husband's share of power. It backfired. She lost the war and died soon after. To mend the alliance, Antony returned to Rome and married Octavia, Octavian's sister. She was noble, loyal, and far more patient than Antony deserved. For a time it worked, but not for long. In 37 BCE, Antony left again, officially to prepare for war against Parthia. But really, he was returning to Cleopatra, and this time, he didn't come back. In Alexandria, they became more than lovers. They became partners in power. Cleopatra gave birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later a third son named Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony began dressing like a Hellenistic king, hosting ceremonies, granting territories to his children. In one lavish event, the donations of Alexandria, he named Cleopatra Queen of Kings, and their son Caesarion as the true heir of Julius Caesar, not Octavian. To Rome it looked like betrayal. To Octavian it looked like war. Because whatever Antony had built in Alexandria, it was starting to look a lot like an empire of his own. By 32 BCE, the Second Triumvirate was dead in all but name. Antony had vanished into the east. Octavian controlled Rome, and what had once been a fragile alliance was now a cold war waiting to break. The breaking point came when Octavian got hold of Antony's will. How? No one knows for sure. But inside the temple of the Vestal Virgins, guarded by priestesses sworn to secrecy, sat a copy of Antony's final wishes. Octavian took it. He read it before the Senate, and then the people. It confirmed their worst fears. Antony had asked to be buried in Alexandria. He'd given land to his children by Cleopatra. He'd named Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, as Caesar's true heir, not Octavian. It was the moment Octavian had been waiting for. He didn't declare war on Antony. He declared war on Cleopatra. That was the brilliance of it. Rome wouldn't fight another civil war. It would fight a foreign queen. Antony became a footnote in his own rebellion, cast as a traitor, blinded by love, lost in the East. Rome turned against him. Antony, meanwhile, prepared for war. He still had legions. He still had ships. He still had Cleopatra and the wealth of Egypt behind him. In 31 BCE, the two sides met at sea. The Battle of Actium. Antony and Cleopatra brought hundreds of warships, powerful but slow. Octavian's fleet was smaller, but led by Marcus Agrippa, a brilliant naval commander who knew exactly how to fight on his terms. The battle lasted hours. Smoke, fire, chaos. Then Cleopatra's ship broke formation and retreated. Why? Panic? Strategy? We still don't know, but Antony followed. His fleet collapsed without him. Back in Alexandria, he tried to rally, but the illusion was gone. His allies abandoned him. His soldiers surrendered. The myth of Antony, hero of Caesar, conqueror of the East, was falling apart. And Octavian? He didn't rush to finish the job. He took his time, because he didn't need to defeat Antony anymore. Antony was defeating himself. By the time Antony returned to Alexandria, there was nothing left to win. His navy had fallen apart. His legions were surrendering. His allies were gone. Even his image, hero of Rome, defender of Caesar, had shattered. Still, he held on. He and Cleopatra tried to bargain. They sent envoys to Octavian, offered him treasure, offered him peace. They even offered to step aside. Octavian said nothing. He didn't need to. He was already marching toward Egypt. Inside the palace, Cleopatra began preparing for the end. She sealed herself in a mausoleum, filled with treasures and guards. Antony trained like the war wasn't already lost. Some days he gave speeches to no one. Other days, he disappeared into silence. Then came the rumor. Cleopatra was dead. Antony didn't stop to ask questions. He didn't wait for proof. In that moment, everything crumbled. He took out his sword and fell on it. But the wound didn't kill him. Bleeding and broken, he was carried, still alive, to Cleopatra's tomb. She wasn't dead. She had faked her death to test Antony's loyalty, and he had answered it with blood. They saw each other one last time. According to the story, she refused to open the door but had him hoisted up through a window. He died in her arms. The man who had stood beside Caesar ended in a quiet tomb far from Rome. Octavian entered the city days later. He met Cleopatra and allowed her to live, for now. She tried to charm him as she had Caesar and Antony before him. But Octavian wasn't a man who followed passion. He followed strategy. He planned to parade her through Rome, a symbol of his triumph. She refused. Cleopatra arranged her death carefully. Some say it was poison. Others, a snake hidden in a basket of figs. What mattered was the result. She was gone. Caesarion was captured and quietly executed. There were no more rivals, no more legacies to claim. Octavian stood alone, and Mark Antony, the last man to challenge him, was gone, not with glory, but with a whisper. Mark Antony left no empire, no dynasty, no monument, not even a name passed down through Roman history. What he left behind was something harder to measure: stories. To Augustus and the Rome he built, Antony became a warning. A man who traded discipline for desire, who lost himself in the East, who chose a queen over his country. But that was only part of him. Others remembered a brilliant commander, a loyal friend, a man who rode with Caesar when others hesitated, who fought at Pharsalus, and who avenged his death when no one else dared. Later writers, especially Plutarch, gave him the shape of a tragic hero. And then, centuries after that, Shakespeare made him immortal. Antony and Cleopatra, the love story, the downfall, the drama. But behind the myth was a man who never quite fit the world he was born into. He lived during the death of the Republic, but didn't believe in the old ways. He was too emotional for politics, too political for purity, too Roman for the East, and too Eastern for Rome. He was caught between eras, where Octavian built an empire of rules and masks and order. Antony charged through life without a plan B. He followed loyalty instead of strategy. He chased love instead of power. And in doing so, he made room for a new kind of ruler to rise. Because without Antony, his war, his fall, his final retreat, Octavian could never have become Augustus so cleanly. And maybe that's Antony's real legacy. He was the last rival, the final flame, a man who burned brightly and burned out completely. Thank you for watching The Hidden Thread. If you've made it this far, we hope you're starting to see the deeper pattern. The way Caesar's death didn't end the crisis of the Republic. It passed it on. To Antony, to Cleopatra, and ultimately, to Octavian. And yet, even in defeat, Antony left something behind. His daughter with Cleopatra, Cleopatra Selene, was taken to Rome, raised by Octavia, and later became Queen of Mauritania, a client queen under Roman rule, a daughter of two worlds. His sons, Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus, vanished, taken to Rome, and never heard from again. History remembers the winners, but sometimes it's the ones who fell short who show us what the world could have been. In our next episode, we turn to the man who tried to stop all of this before it began. Marcus Junius Brutus, philosopher, senator, assassin. A man who believed he was saving the Republic by killing its greatest general. If you want to see where the thread leads next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for episode 3. This has been The Hidden Thread, where history is not just told, it is revealed.